Start the stream. Okie doke. And we are live. Hello and welcome to Fermenting Opinions. I'm your host, David Papiden.
I'm your co-host, James McVeigh.
And we are Fermenting Opinions, the podcast in search of a more palatable political ferment. Today is June 13, 2018. This is Season 2, Episode 12. And today we have something that falls a little bit outside the realm of politics. This is more into philosophy and discussions, and it's about the nature of discourse, which is why I thought it would be interesting to bring this up. Because we've been interviewing a lot of local candidates and what have you lately, and some people who are not local to us might get a little bit fatigued. So we're going to take a break from that. And today we're bringing to you, and very pleased to have on the show, Anthony Magnabosco, and he is of Street Epistemology fame. Hi, Anthony, and welcome to the show.
Hello, guys. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm really excited to be here. I really am. This is cool.
Very pleased to have you.
Definitely.
We met, this was, I guess, a few months ago now at NanoCon, which is the Nashville Nuns, not to be confused with Catholic nuns, but nuns is a non-religiously affiliated.
I was trying.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was trying to put it together. Did we meet at Nashville or Oklahoma City for the American Atheist Convention? But it was NanoCon, apparently.
It was Nashville, yeah. Because I'm a Nashville.
Yeah, we're pretty close to Nashville ourselves here.
Local to sort of the area. And I was there. I was there with Americans United. I was tabling for them, but it's always fun to get to go. Then I get to take little breaks and check out the speakers and what have you. And I got to see you and Matt Dillahunty, which I'm also a big fan of. I'm a big fan of both of you guys, actually.
Oh,
so
okay. Were you at the workshop that I did, or the sort of the sit down in the gymnasium 30-minute or hour-long talk that we did?
It was your second talk of the day. I was in the gymnasium for it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You know, it's funny. I haven't seen the video from that yet. I hope they release it.
Yeah, I don't know.
I thought it was a good talk.
I can check with, I think it's Patrick Horst, who did a lot of work with that. He's the guy who helps run NanoCon. So I might hit him up on that one. But anyway. So tell us about street epistemology. Tell us about, well, first of all, because a lot of people who won't know, we use a lot of terms that are sort of jargony in the in the communities.
Yes.
What is epistemology?
Epistemology is the study of knowledge, and it sort of in hindsight, street epistemology is not so much about what a person knows or investigating what a person knows. It's investigating how a person concluded what they think is true is really true. So, you know, as we've been sort of taking this idea of street epistemology from Peter Boghossian's book and running with it, you know, we're starting to look back on things and be like, you know, the street epistemology thing, was it really the best name for this type of approach that we're doing? But so epistemology is the study of knowledge. Street epistemology, if we want to kind of go to the next step, I suppose, is that the act of engaging with somebody in a conversation, whether it happens organically or you're initiating it on the street, and basically sort of peeling back the layers that a person has built their belief on. Why do they think that's true, and how did they conclude that it's true? So it's not as formal as the name implies. So you hear the word epistemology and you think it's this big academic initiative. And it's really just a bunch of people who like talking to others and challenging them in a friendly way how they concluded that their belief is true. And this is where we are today, sort of trying to deal with the different words that are out there and trying to figure out where we're going with this thing too, quite honestly. Gotcha. I don't know if that was helpful or not. I hope it was.
I think it is because, you know, again, there's terminology that we're going to fly around with a little bit, and people who are not, you know, well versed in that already or already haven't been sort of, you know, traveling those deep roads, they'll just be like, well, what are we talking about? I don't want to get like too super academic or anything, but like just sort of a basic understanding. Because I've heard in some of your talks that you describe like, well, what is your epistemology for determining? Maybe it's a roll of the dice, I think is one example I've heard you use. I think it might have been in your talk actually that day.
I might have. Yeah, there's different ways that people use to come to know the things that they claim to know. And some people will investigate it and do research. Other people will just need to watch something on the news, and then they that's their epistemology. That's how they came to know that that's true.
Gotcha.
They might hear a friend say something, or they might take it on faith or roll a die or flip a coin and say, okay, I'm going to now believe that this is true because of these various reasons. So epistemology is the study of those ways, and street epistemology is exploring, figuring out which method they used, and then exploring how they concluded that it was a reliable method.
Okay,
Gotcha.
But that,
Go ahead.
again, I may be softballing you this, but that does sound a lot like the Socratic method. It's the idea of asking questions to arrive to a conclusion.
Yes, there shouldn't be any confusion. The street epistemology is largely based on, it was inspired by the Socratic method, from my understanding. The fellow that created street epistemology and wrote the book A Manual for Creating Atheists, Peter Boghossian, is a philosophy professor. I had the opportunity to work with him on an app, and it's based in like ancient Greek, where
what's the name of the app?
It's called Atheos, and you're basically one of Plato's. I think you're sort of helping the prisoners escape from the cage, from the cave. Yeah. So if you're into philosophy, and this is
the allegory of the cave and all this good stuff.
Yeah, the thing is though, like the way that I think street epistemology is different than the Socratic method is that we're not so much interested in exploring concepts like what is virtue or what's bravery or those types of things. We're interested in how did you come to conclude that this belief that you think is true is really true? We're focused more in street epistemology on conclusions that tend to motivate us to behave differently. So, it's really kind of evolved quite a bit, and there's a lot of other disciplines I think that are making street epistemology what it is. There's people who study linguistics are fascinated by the words that we use during these conversations, and they want to study it. People who are involved in motivational interviewing and psychotherapy, they see these conversations and they're like, what Anthony is doing in that video, or Ty, or placing pebbles, or all the other people. There are so many people that are doing this. They noticed similarities in the conversations that we're having with people about their beliefs to the type of sort of the psychotherapy conversations that a doctor might have with a patient.
Exactly. The open-ended questions of
right. And I think one of the things that initially drew me to street epistemology and gaining addition, and I wouldn't call myself a street epistemologist by any stretch, but I would say I have a heavy appreciation for the approach from my experience with it, in the fact that it does take a more Socratic approach, and the fact that it is less, because it's aware of, what do they call it, the blowback or backfire effect, where someone states that they have a belief in a proposition that this thing is true, and then you come at them and you say, no, you're wrong because of X, Y, and Z. It is, the effect that renders on most people for a closely held belief, and especially in the face of someone they perceive to be, an opponent or an enemy. The natural inclination is to dig your heels in and to look harder for reasons to tell the other person why they're wrong, rather than exploring whether or not your own beliefs are really justified or not. And that's what drew me to SE in the first place.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I sort of forgot to mention a big thing about what makes street epistemology so different than debating and arguing and presenting facts, and that is by asking questions and helping a person feel comfortable that they can share their beliefs with you, and sort of encouraging that back and forth dialogue of let's explore it together. That seems to be the best way to help a person reflect on their belief and the methods they use to get there, where, you're asking lots of questions, but not so many to overwhelm them, and not to be like a nagging little, 5-year-old asking, over and over again. Like these tend to be very respectful questions, and, presented in a way that we don't overwhelm the person with all these,
Right, like
confusing a person and overwhelming somebody is one of the last things that we want to do when we're having these kinds of talks.
Gotcha. And I think that's an important point. I think that we're going to want to get back to sort of later in the conversation. Now, how did you yourself personally become involved with street epistemology? Was it just because you read Pete Boghossian's book, Manual for Creating Atheists? Is that where it came from for you? You read it and you go, aha, I want to do this thing? Or was that really it, or was there something else?
It was the book. I think it was the book. Now, I was at a Freedom from Religion event. It was their 35th anniversary, and it was in Portland, and they did have Boghossian as a speaker. And I think he was either promoting his book or he was selling. I don't know. It's conceivable that I heard him speak, bought his book there, and then read it, because I do remember reading it on the plane and thinking, oh my gosh, this is really interesting. If there's a better way of having a conversation with a person about politics or God or karma or whatever, then I definitely want to give this a try, because I was losing relationships because I was arguing with people. So I think it was.
I can speak to that.
It was the book.
That sounds familiar.
I think we all can. I think we all can kind of relate to that. And man, I mean, I've had good talks with people using street epistemology about a guy who thought that voter registration should be required. From that to.
I just listened to that one today, actually. I was going through some of yours, and like, was it all just religion stuff? And I was like, oh, voter ID, really? Okay.
Yeah. What's this doing in here?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's sort of the misconception, is that, oh, this was written by a guy. He wrote a book called A Manual for Creating Atheists, and this was launched in the atheist community, and we're getting all this traction. And if you're sort of into the atheist community, you've probably heard of street epistemology, but we want to break beyond it. That's why I'm so excited to be on your show, is that I think that this is a great approach to use for any type of disagreement or any type of truth claim.
I would actually completely agree with you. And I was going to say is that I don't really involve myself in the atheist community. I am myself an atheist, but at the same time, I would much rather use this style to engage people in everyday thought instead of browbeating, faith and everything like that. I mean, people have faith, and that's, to me, when you have faith in something, it's this irrational belief. It's something that you just kind of make the jump. You don't actually back it up with facts or something you've observed. It's something that you just personally believe without a reason to do so.
Mm-hmm. I'm a little torn, because I really do like talking to people about why they think God is real. Mm-hmm. Mainly because I don't know if you guys used to believe, or maybe if your listeners used to believe, when you discard your God belief, your politics tend to change also. Your whole view of the world tends to really drastically change. So I kind of like going after the God belief if my conversation partner is willing to do so, because so many other beliefs are based on it. If you can help a person discover that, oh my gosh, I really don't know how my God is real, all sorts of other things can fall to the wayside. However, like today, when I go out on the trail, I tend to ask people, here's a couple of different topics we can talk about. We can talk about karma or politics or God, something supernatural, or maybe even some political stance that you have. I like to encourage them to pick the topic. Today, somebody picked karma. Comes up all the time. Somebody picked God. I talked to a woman who had a 4-leaf clover charm, and she thought that protected her from accidents. And then another one was everything happens for a reason. And then a woman who thought that she could pick up on the vibes that people are putting out, and then she could accurately determine if they are a good or bad person. So I'm completely fine using street epistemology for any type of claim. I really am. It's versatile.
Gotcha. I think one of the things that I had also seen, I think it was on the, I don't know if that's your podcast, the Street Epistemology podcast, or if that's just done by affiliates of yours or what have you. But anyway, there's several episodes that are of you. But I also I was listening to one, I think it was yesterday, about someone did street epistemology on an atheist, asking a woman basically, how she was sort of justifying her belief that like for this, the proposition that there is no God kind of thing. And it was kind of interesting to watch her struggle with some of those claims as she had, and she's like, oh, what did you do? What did you do to me, kind of thing, because she had to take a step back and think about it. And I think that was probably one of the most beautiful moments I think in terms of the Socratic approach I've ever seen, because it can apply equally to everybody.
For sure. We try to. I guess kind of early on, it dawned on me that, I shouldn't just end a conversation because if someone says, oh, I'm also an atheist. No, we want to push back and say, well, how did you conclude that there's no, some people will go and say there's no God. That's a pretty high bar to set, and it's a pretty easy thing to SE. I've had dozens and dozens of conversations with non-believers who have moved off of their levels of certainty that there's no God, because they discover that they really they really don't know how they could be.
Yeah, I was going to say,
exactly.
David and I have done that a few times, actually.
Yeah.
David is a staunch believer in the fact that there's not a God, and
you're more.
By
non-theist.
definition,
It's the whole lack theism.
I was going to say, by definition, I guess that would make me agnostic, but I don't personally believe there's a God. However, I also recognize the fact that I can't prove that either.
Anthony's over here licking his lips.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you have 5 minutes to chat?
Not on that subject.
You can if you really want to.
Not on that subject. Not on that subject right now.
Okay.
But,
Yeah. Sometimes people get really hung up on these differences between belief and knowledge, and I've actually admittedly been somewhat sloppy. Sometimes I'll slip between, even in the same conversation, I jump between belief and knowing, and I'm a lot more careful these days because people watch the videos that I upload and then they tell me where I screwed up. So I try to use that as feedback to get better over the years.
Right. Yeah. And I've seen that too from your Facebook group and stuff, that I'm sort of a lurker in the group, and occasionally I'll post something or ask a question. But like talk about like, well, here's how this conversation went with such and such, and here's where it went wrong, and here's what I could have done better. Actually pursuant to that, what do you feel like are some of like your biggest successes, if that's the correct term, and where are the places that you feel like you've messed up, other than maybe being a little bit sloppy with your language, like conversations have just gone bad, and why did they go bad, that kind of thing?
Oh, that's good. That's a good question. I mean, we probably have to define like what success means, and my concept of success has really changed over the years. Like when I first went out, I guess maybe a success would be getting a person to say, I don't know, within 5 or 10 minutes. Or when I ask them a question and they don't know the answer, don't walk over the pause. Like they're thinking, don't interrupt their quiet thinking with another question. It's so tempting to want to get them off the hook, because like I feel bad for them. Like they're struggling and they're trying to come up with an answer, but it's so important to let them think about it and not interrupt it. So but see, as you do this more, it becomes second nature. So you start, at least for myself, I think I keep ratcheting it up. Like, what is a success? So like today, a success might be, everything that was a success before. So like not stepping on the pause and hearing, I don't know. And perhaps I guess today it might be like seeing a drop in confidence in my belief. So like, when we first started this talk, I was really sure that this is true, but now, after we've been talking for 12 minutes, I guess you got me thinking. I'm really not sure now. That type of thing. Lately, though, it's not only sort of ending on good terms, but when they're interested in what I was just doing with them, where they're like, okay, now that we've talked about Jesus and everything, let's set that aside. What exactly what was all that questions? And I've never really thought about my belief in this way before. Where can I learn more about what we just did together? Like, that's really cool when they're like, I want to do what we just did with my friend or with my mom. So it just keeps getting ratcheted up higher and higher as far as like what I look back on and say, now that was a good talk.
Gotcha.
Okay. Oh, you also were asking about you're asking about failures too.
Yes.
I guess.
Yeah. We have both ends. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
it's not like these are just always perfect
because we've all had
conversation.
conversations, right, that we feel like it's gone completely wrong.
Oh, yeah.
And you walk away afterwards saying that was not, that was not my best self, or that was not fulfilling, or that wasn't a productive use of anybody's time. Like, there are lots of ways where, just any kind of dialogue can go bad. Particular though to using, employing SE, on the street when you've got your clipboard and you're out there on the trail, kind of thing. When is keeping it street gone wrong?
Well, it can tend to go wrong if I sort of slip back into my debating mode days. Like even today, a couple things happened today where like I ran into a Christian and he's a doctor, and the main reason why he thought his God was real is because of the complexity of the human body. These parts just don't all these parts just don't all work on their own. They have to be part of this big system. And then he kind of went on to talk about, it was kind of bugging me all day, honestly, where, kind of this, even if you say that you don't believe in a God, that's the God allowing you to say that you don't believe. So sometimes these things tend to irk me a little bit, even though I think I'm really good at not letting it get to me. Sometimes I can feel like I'm a little bit more amped up and I want to sort of like, I don't know how to like phrase it, but
to push back
a little bit more, like maybe like kind of leaving him with sort of a stinging question rather than a reflective question. So when I feel myself, and this happened today, when I feel myself going that way, I try to end it. I try to end the talk so it doesn't keep escalating. Thank you very much. Maybe we can talk some other time. And then I spend a little time thinking about it. Like I was thinking about it a lot today. There was another thing that happened today. A woman, the same woman with the pendant that was in the shape of a
was it
four-leaf clover. Yeah, It had the potential of being a great talk that would have been perfect for YouTube, but I think I rushed the rapport building phase. I think she was just it's uncomfortable to talk to somebody about this stuff to begin with, and then when it's a stranger in the woods where I happen to go, like on this hiking trail, and I'm filming it. And I've got 2 cameras now, and it's this complicated thing. I think I could have done a little bit more at the start to make her comfortable, and she just remained a little bit guarded the entire time, and it was really unfortunate because I think it was great in terms of peeling back the layers of her belief and exposing the weak foundation that this was built on, but it was just sort of, it was uncomfortable, and I that's my fault. So these things are usually things that I screw up on. These are usually my fault.
Gotcha. And I guess as the initiator and the person with sort of a plan, right? And you're the one who's sort of setting the stage and sort of being the arbiter of how that conversation's going to go. The decorum of the talk. And so if there's a problem with it, you can put that on yourself. I think we do that a little bit as well with ourselves. We do like hangouts and stuff like that. We try to bring people in and talk about, what their position is on the, the politics of the day. Like we did a talk on North Korea yesterday, and like if you're not working to keep things copacetic and helping build a good rapport with people, it's going to get ugly, right? And that's antithetical with what we're trying to do with our program. So I guess that definitely resonates.
It's funny because the hardest thing I think with street epistemology is it's more on the facilitator of it. If you're having a bad day, stay home and don't go out. If you feel rushed because you only have 30 minutes to do a talk, I would just recommend skipping it. Like don't even do it, because if you're rushed or something is perturbing you, then it's going to probably come through in your conversations. It's not difficult to figure out the types of questions that you can ask to explore what a person believes, why they think it's true, and how they determine that it's true. That's the biggest part, is the how. But it seems like it's the interpersonal stuff that is crucial. Like you really need to pay attention to that and manage it as best you can.
Is that? It's almost like there's a parallel to like what a lot of Christians say, like witnessing to somebody, or and fellowshipping, and sort of building that rapport with the person. Like I have a lot of people who approach me as an atheist who are Christians of various stripes, and they try sort of that same sort of thing of like building a relationship as a way of like sort of in a way like testifying about their faith. Which that's not a very good epistemology, that he's a nice person, so therefore Christianity is true.
Exactly. Yeah, I should really probably believe what they have to say because he's just such a nice guy.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, there is something to be said for being cordial and respectful, and I try to disclose as much as I can about what's going to happen during the talk at the start too. And I guess there's such a big difference, I guess, between like evangelizing and what we tend to do with SE. With street epistemology, we are asking questions to figure out how they concluded what they think is true is really true. And then we tend to stop. we don't expose the shaky foundation of faith using questions and then say, now here's a book by Christopher Hitchens. Make sure you go check it out. Like,
great.
We leave, we sort of, it's a little bit of a tennis match, I suppose. I mean, we're kind of playing on the same side of the net, but it's sort of like, let's end the talk, take some time to think about it. And if you have any questions, reach out to us, reach out to me. If you're starting to experience doubt, I can direct you to a group that can help you with that or that type of thing. But this isn't about pushing a worldview. It's about exploring how they concluded that their worldview is correct.
Gotcha. I guess one of the things that I've seen in some of your videos is the way you do follow-ups, right? That you'll have like a sort of a part one with a hypothetical person, Zach or something like that, and you would talk about your beliefs, and I guess you guys share contact information at the end, and then there's like a part two, and there's like this progression leading this person, and a lot of times it has to do with like he's assigned a confidence level to his faith, and we'll just say Jesus, and it's 100% in the first one, and by the second one it's well, he's only calling it 80%, and then by the third one, well, maybe it's only 50% now, and you see these kinds of things, and I guess what seems unusual to me from my own experiences in discourse and perhaps in debate is that, like, say you have a discussion with somebody, which is probably a debate, and maybe that is the key difference. I'm answering my own question. That you have this conversation, then there's a time lapse between the next time you guys engage. Right. And usually, like, if someone's given me strong arguments for, this and that, right, I'm going to go get on my Googler and figure out, why they're wrong, kind of thing. Like, I'm going to go and I'm going to dig around, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to be ready for you, kind of thing. Like, I'm going to be ready for all your arguments. I used to do this, actually. This is like back years ago. I used to meet with two preachers, a father and son, at a Dunkin' Donuts in town, and they would come to me every week with print-offs from like creation.com of like, the temple with the Stegosaurus like reliefs on it, and and like all the young Earth stuff like that, and they would give it to me like, deal with that, David, and I could either deal with it on the fly, or I'd be like, well, I don't know, I'll have to do some thinking on this, and then come back and be like, boom, here's why you're wrong, and that was probably me just engaging in that, in that backfire effect. Maybe I think I'm also right, but I'd have to admit there was some of that going on too. But that doesn't happen in your conversations.
It doesn't happen, and I think I could tell you why. And it's because I'm not making a case why they're mistaken. They're making a case why they're correct. So all the work really is on, when you're doing street epistemology, I think the work is not on me as a facilitator. I mean, there's a little bit of work in that I have to try to be calm and neutral and make it a safe environment for them to explore these types of things. But the justification falls on the person who's making the claim. And I try to never get into a situation where I'm now giving them something to show that they're wrong. That is the death knell of a one-on-one conversation, I think, unless a person is ready for it. Sometimes I meet people and they say, and this actually happened with a guy. We were on an airplane, and it turned out I don't know if he was a young Earth creationist, but he didn't think evolution was true. And he said, well, if there could be a transitional fossil showing how fish came onto land, then I think that really would seriously impact my belief. Now, I didn't just start pulling up an article and emailing him stuff. You need to make sure people are really saying this stuff and would really lower their confidence in their belief were they to see it. The other thing is, I wouldn't provide anything until he was able to identify what he would accept and how it would impact his confidence. Only then should you work with them. So like in the case, like with you meeting these people, it was sort of like ping pong, right? They'd give you something and you'd swat it down, or you'd give them something and they'd swat it down. We waste so much time talking about reasons that are not the reasons why people believe this stuff. Like a good question at the very start with those guys might have been, and maybe you've asked this, but might have been something like, if you discovered that evolution was really true, would it impact your confidence in any way that this God exists?
Gotcha.
And if they say, no, I think I'd be still 100% sure that this God was real. Don't talk about evolution anymore. There's something else propping up the belief besides evolution. So all that sort of back and forth of evidence and this and that, it could have very well been a waste of time. I don't know in this situation.
Yeah, I think that's a key point there, that you're discovering what actually motivates the belief and what actually doesn't, or what actually justifies in their mind. And that was actually this funny thing is the final time I met with them. And we had gone. I chewed through all of their Enters in Genesis articles and all that. I'd done all that for, it was, I don't know, better part of a year probably of doing that, like every week. And then finally they're like, well, David, what are you trying to get out of this? And I'm like, well, I want you to have doubt about, basically I was being very ham-fisted about, like, maybe you guys should be more skeptical about your beliefs. And like, they just looked at me and scoffed, and like, that was it. Like, after all that time.
Oh, wow.
I wasn't.
See, doubt is a scary word. Doubt can really scare people away. And we were talking about words earlier, like words. It's funny how changing that question or that response to say, I'm curious to see what would cause you to question this belief. That may have achieved the same goal or sort of showed your same goal, but in a softer way. A lot of believers are taught to believe that doubt is scary, doubt is bad. You never doubt. You doubt your doubts. But questioning's great. I encourage questioning. We encourage our believers to question all the time. So sometimes the word choice can really just completely submarine a conversation.
Yeah, and I think I did that pretty spectacular. And it was one of those things, the reflections after like all this time and energy sort of invested into relationship and all that stuff.
Yeah, but don't take it so bad. Like,
I learned a ton of science.
From it,
I mean,
yeah,
I learned a ton of biology and cosmology. I ended up learning a bunch of stuff talking to those guys.
Okay,
maybe
good.
Not, maybe not good conversation skills, but I did learn a lot of science. Did you have anything else you wanted to ask? Sort of.
I mean, I just have a general small critique. Is listening to both of y'all talk about this, it really does sound like a version of atheist evangelism. I mean,
yeah, and
it sounds like
it's not a bad way to segue.
Sure, but it really does sound like the end goal here is exactly what you were saying: is to make people doubt, not a question or however you want to phrase it, but to implant this seed that perhaps there is no God. And perhaps your understanding of religion.
Are you just the next generation of like Sam Singleton? Are you Anthony Magnabosco?
I don't know who that is.
Oh yeah, Sam Singleton. He was.
I don't know.
He used to travel. He used to go to like some of the. I don't know what happened to him. Actually, I was just talking to James before the show. But he would put on this show that apparently he was a sort of a maybe a B-list atheist like personality. And he would put on shows and stuff like that were half, rhetoric and half comedy and things like that he would come out because he was from a family of preachers. So he had to preach something, but he was an atheist. So he was going to preach atheism to people, and he was going to be an atheist evangelist. And it was like a comedic show that he would do that I had seen him a couple times years back, like back in like 2013, 14, and stuff like that. No idea what's happened to him now, but that's Sam Singleton.
Yeah. Well, it's a common, I think it's a misconception that this is about evangelizing for atheism because, well, like I mentioned before, you can use it for any topic. Like if I'm talking to somebody about why they think their pendant is protecting them from car accidents, that's not evangelizing for atheism.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's evangelizing for like anti-pendants or something. When we have these talks, we're exploring their epistemology. It's how they came to that belief, how they came to know the thing that they're claiming to know.
Yes.
Now, the outcome of these conversations can very well be imparting doubt, planting a seed, having them walk away thinking, "Wow, yeah, I'm not really sure how I can believe this anymore." Those are my personal goals, honestly, because I think it's healthy. I think it's healthy for us to question the things that we think are really true. Yeah. Because if you're not questioning them, how on earth can a person be so sure that they really are true? Sometimes the result of these conversations that I have with people is that it edifies their position. I can talk to a Christian, and by the end of a talk or something, I did something on Twitter with a person, they said, I'm even now more sure that what I believe is true. I'm okay with that. This isn't about getting people to believe what I believe. This is about encouraging people to think about how they concluded that their beliefs are really true. And I think there's a difference there. Yes, if a person believes in a God and they discover they don't have evidence and it's based on faith maybe, and they define faith as believing in something that you can't see, or it's that feeling inside that you're believing something that's true. That's what faith is to me. And you can help them discover that it's an unreliable way to conclude that something's true. I think it's great. It might cause them to go out and find a better reason to keep holding the belief, or maybe abandoning the belief. I've had conversations with people who don't believe what they used to believe because of the questioning that they experienced with street epistemology. And I have no apologies about it. I think it's a great thing. I think everybody should be doing this, including God believers. I would like to see people who believe in God, or if you're Republican or Democrat or independent or progressive or whatever, like, this is a tool to figure out if you're believing things that are true. I think it is, or at the very least, it's a tool for figuring out if you're believing in something that might be untrue. And I think there's a subtle difference there. You can kind of start. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I see exactly.
I tend to ramble a lot. I'm sorry.
No,
it's all
fine.
right. No, it's perfect. I mean, I pitched you a very open-ended question, but and I tend to agree with you. I think employing this version of the Socratic method is a great way of getting people to question their own beliefs and to reason their way through them. Like you may encounter somebody who has reasoned their way through what they believe, and they can sit there and answer every question you're going to ask, or you may come up with somebody who just bought it off of TV. They got it from CNN or Fox News.
I was about to say, for some people, Fox News is their epistemology.
Or MSNBC does the same thing.
Okay.
I mean, you just pitch something that, like, as a perfect example is this North Korea talk. You could go either way with this. You could completely believe that this is going to be a peace era and that Donald Trump is brilliant and this is the greatest thing that's ever happened. Or you go the exact opposite direction, be like, all you did was make, Kim Jong-un a propaganda video that he can now sell and say, look at America's kowtowing to us. You could go either way. You could sell both ends as much as you want to, but how are you actually going to justify?
I think some of that is in terms of that's to an extent it's predictive. I've actually got there's an example I want to ask you real quick. It was a conversation I was actually having today on Facebook, and it was one of the endless relitigations of the 2016 election. And my interlocutor, my conversation partner, we'll call him, was asserting that, well, Trump would have won the popular vote, but if it wasn't for all of those, illegally cast ballots by, illegal aliens and dead people, right? And I said, well, that's, and I wasn't doing SE, so I was like, well, that's pretty demonstrably false. There's really no evidence for that these kinds of ballots were being cast. And he says, well, I can just show you my source that refutes your source, and you'll dismiss mine as biased, and I'll dismiss yours as biased. And so, toss our hands up in the air. Nobody knows what a fact is anymore. How would you have maybe approached that differently?
It is tougher to use SE, I think, with political stances because the epistemology is different than religion. Usually with religion, it's a feeling, or it gives me a sense of comfort, or I'm basing it on faith, or I've had this personal experience. And with a political stance, it's, well, I have this source. And then it sort of comes down to, well, how much credibility are we giving the source? Why aren't I weighting that source equally? It's tough. It's tough. A good possible question might be something like, if that same source were to write a retraction, would you change your mind on it? You can try to get a sense of how important that source is. It's just challenging. It really is challenging. Sometimes just asking them, how far are they willing to go with believing that source? If the source reported something completely. Is there anything that the source could report that you wouldn't believe? You try to ask that in a way without insulting them.
Gotcha.
But if you can try to get a sense of their ceiling, like how far are they willing to go with believing a particular source? It's tough. It really is tough because we tend to we have the sources that we trust more than the others, and we just, it's something that we naturally do. I don't know if I have a really good answer for you. I've really been trying to do more political types of discussions so that I can practice at it and get good at it, because I think I've got the religion and the spiritual and supernatural stuff nailed. It's the
political belief, because like it's
the political beliefs that are challenging.
Mm-hmm. It's like the guy was saying that, like, well, you know, if I present an argument or something that I would consider a fact, say like I fact check something on like Snopes or something, and then they'll say, well, Snopes is liberal, therefore false or something like that. Like, and then
they'll just dismiss it. Yeah,
dismiss it on the basis of a some presumption of bias, versus there being some well researched falsity that they've discovered,
right.
And I don't know how to unpack that really, other than saying we need to take sort of a multiplicity of sources, stay away from anything that's too hyperbolic or editorialized in all the punditry and what have you, and look at who is not really having their own, as small as possible, their own opinion on things, and are just stating what facts are.
Well, the question there becomes, what is sourced information? What is being quoted from somebody, what's being quoted from a study or something.
And what are they saying? What's being assumed from it?
And where is narrative being injected that's actually being biased? Yep. You could be like, okay, well, I don't know, Hillary Clinton deleted 33,000 emails. And you could leave it at that.
Yeah.
And plenty of people think that, oh my God, she deleted all this evidence and all of this. And well, her version of the events, was that these were yoga meetings and things that like I intermingled personal and business in the same email account. And you don't need to know what my yoga schedule was.
Right. And someone else thinks that she's hiding her,
exactly.
Hiding Pizzagate in there somewhere.
So if you just say she deleted 33,000 emails, yeah, okay, we get it. Yep. It could be anything. It could be nefarious. But you can add layers to that information based on sourced material. And then you have to look at who your source is. Well, your source is Hillary Clinton. So if you don't find her trustworthy in the first place, you're going to.
But how do you put that through sort of the SE lens? I think it's sort of the big rub,
Yeah. I think a good example might be the one that we mentioned earlier, where there was a fellow. I get the sense that he was probably right-leaning. He thought that voter identification should be required. And I didn't just pull out stats to show the fraud rate of voting in America over the last 50 years or 100 years or something. That is probably not very helpful. Like SE is about exploring how he concluded that voter identification should be required. Mm-hmm. He felt that there was fraud. Why did he think that there was fraud? Well, his mother passed away recently, and about 2 weeks after she died, he got a phone call, and it seemed like there was somebody phishing, maybe trying to get some information about her and possibly vote in her name.
Okay.
And then he ran into a friend who did some work in Chicago who actually used to do this, and they would go haunt the cemeteries for names. So his stance on preventing people from voting without an identification was not because of statistics or anything like that. It was because of these two personal experiences that he had, and that was so. It's just, I guess the best advice that I have is simply just ask questions and have them explain it to you.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
But how do you confront him then with the idea between
I think
anecdotal evidence and sourced evidence? And
it's not to confront him though.
And I don't mean necessarily confront him, but how do you steer the question at that point?
Yeah, I guess at the end, so like I posted that video and people comment and they had great, and I actually saw the guy the other day. He didn't have time to talk, but I'd love to do a follow-up with him where I would like to ask him, how many disenfranchised voters makes it worth going to an identification system? Like what is his threshold basically for, if 1 million people couldn't vote because of voter identification, would you be happy with that? Or is it 100,000? Is it 20? Is it 10?
The question of stopping one illegal vote versus how many do you disenfranchise?
Yeah. If I remember right, he said that he basically wanted a perfect system for voting.
Gotcha.
That was sort of his.
Yeah, I heard that one too. Yeah, he was saying really, the desirable number is 0.
No, this is starting to sound like the RFID Obamacare chips.
No, jeez.
The idea.
No, I don't think he was that. It's more like the acceptable number of like school shootings is 0 kind of thing. Yeah. But he was just sort of acting towards that.
I think the takeaway is that he had set a very high bar, and maybe he wasn't being consistent with setting up a high bar for other things. So. But the big takeaway of that talk, I think, was that we explored his position. I didn't argue with him about Trump. Our voices didn't get heated. I had a totally better understanding of why he thought that this was true. And I think he did too. And when we saw each other, 2 days later, we shook hands again, and it was cordial.
Gotcha. And I think that's really, I mean, just so valuable. And relatable to what we're trying to do here. I was going to say, get into understanding why intelligence minds disagree on really closely held and important topics in politics, really, with us.
These two ideas do meld well together. I mean, this is basically our goal too.
You see what I was going for?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This is
so
what we try to do.
For your listeners who are interested in politics and what we're talking about with street epistemology, I think there's a great opportunity to kind of take the ball and run it further down the field with using this method for political beliefs. I think it would be great if people started showing up at conventions and breaking off, not talking to three people and yelling at them, but seeing if somebody wants to step aside and have a conversation with you that you're either recording or not. Mm-hmm. Ideally, you can record it and share it so that other people can see it and give you feedback. Mm-hmm. But we need people to start using these tools in political settings and getting more proficient at it and sharing their knowledge with the other practitioners of this method.
I completely agree. Actually, I think you're hitting
the nail on the head. And I guess, I mean, I love all of that, obviously, but at the same time, with some of with this approach and with this method, it does still raise the hackles of particularly Christian apologists. And some of which I've been in communication with, and some of which I've just things I've observed and watched in other places on other podcasts and shows and things like that. Some people are really critical of street epistemology, and we already sort of talked about whether or not this is atheist evangelism. I think you handled that pretty well. But there are other objections. One being chiefly that you're sort of accosting someone who's maybe never really given serious thought to what their beliefs are or why they know what they believe they know, and sort of catching them flat-footed and on camera, like a bushwhacking kind of technique. Which there's nothing in the tone of your approach that indicates that. But do you think that's a fair criticism? Do you think that's sometimes fair on the part of practitioners that they're trying to catch people?
I can't speak for every practitioner. I'm not looking for a gotcha moment to embarrass a Christian. I'm really, really not. That being said, many people that I do speak with it's seemingly unprepared to explain why they believe what they believe. They're pretty good at explaining what. Like they tend to pay attention to the preacher, and they get the doctrine. They can kind of explain what they believe, and they're pretty good at explaining. They're pretty good at explaining the reasons why, I suppose. They might have to kind of struggle a little bit to figure it out. Mm-hmm. Like, oh yeah, it was my parents taught me this, and that's why I think that it's true. Or I fell through a roof when I was 16 and I was drinking, and when I was laying there bleeding, I experienced Jesus. Like, they're pretty good at explaining why they think it's true. But the issue, not the issue, the area that I think most people struggle with, and this goes for atheists as well, is how are they? It's the how, it's the method, it's the epistemology. How are they concluding that this is true? People, okay, so priests at the pulpit, preachers are not talking about methodology. They're talking about what you should believe. Mm-hmm. The apologists will tell you, here's the reasons why. These are great. Here's the reasons you need to give. These are the hardest ones to show that they're mistaken or to poke holes in. So here's a whole bunch of reasons that you can give as a defense for your faith, even though they might not really be the reasons why the people believe it in the first place. They're sort of backfilling, I think, with these reasons. But nobody is focusing on the how, not even these apologists. The street epistemology completely, I think, circumvents the defenses that most people have for their beliefs, especially their God beliefs. Now, I guess you can make an argument that we're taking advantage of that defect, I guess is the word. But I'm hopeful that, like I said, or I think I said this earlier, like if the end result of a conversation, is somebody walking away thinking, I need to find better reasons, and a something that I can actually demonstrate is solid, like a good basic foundation here, or I can't have this belief, I think that that's a good thing. And maybe they will go out and find. Sometimes people will realize that, oh gosh, I based this on a bad foundation, but I'm still going to believe it because I get all these benefits from having the belief. There are some people that don't care if they're believing something that's true or not. So, I'm hopeful that as these videos of street epistemology get more popular and more people start learning this method, people that are holding fast to certain worldviews and certain beliefs will realize that they need to be more prepared in not only being able to explain what they believe and why and how, but making sure that their method is reliable. That seems to be sort of the whole linchpin of this thing, is that, did I form this belief on a reliable base? Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of the whole thing. If they discover that their belief is not based on a solid foundation, they might want to lower their confidence in it. So I don't really, and the other thing I guess I should say is that whether you've studied your faith or your God belief for decades, we would still ask the same types of questions. It's not like these questions are specifically designed for novice believers, someone who's nascent, someone who's new to the belief. Mm-hmm. I think it just takes a little, like I mentioned in that talk with Dillahunty, I think he asked the same question about, are you picking on people who are ill-prepared? I'll use the same types of questions with people who are literally at the pulpit and teach other people apologetics. And I often have the same results, where they realize that they don't have good justifications and good methods for this belief. So it just takes a little bit more time. And maybe just to end this little part, unless you want to ask more questions, is that what I find kind of funny is that the apologists don't have a problem with people believing these things without being to justify it. It's only when they're being questioned about it and they start to think about it and they might even start to doubt it, that's when they get concerned. They're not worried about people believing these things for poor reasons. And that's where I think their focus should be. And that's why I think street epistemology should be a tool that anybody can learn, including the apologists. We have Facebook groups specifically for people to learn this method. It's called Learn Street Epistemology. Mm-hmm. For people, regardless of your view on any claim, we want everyone to learn it.
No, that's excellent, and that
there's a lot of places we could go from.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a whole lot to unpack.
There's a lot there.
Yeah, there's a lot there, because I'm thinking of a lot of I pay attention to like Capturing Christianity and some other apologetic groups, and I've seen like I said, videos with I believe it's Tim McGrew, and actually he had a debate with Peter Boghossian on it was supposed to be on whether or not street epistemology itself was actually, it was like on the Unbelievables I think a couple of years ago, and it turned into basically an argument centering entirely around the definition of faith, and it came down to in Peter's book. He has what even I, as an atheist, would characterize as a fairly pejorative definition of faith, which I think he says is pretending to know what you don't know. And to me, that is strongly, just on that point right there, is strongly in tension with the SE approach, right? That the idea is that it's not supposed to be confrontational, and that it's not supposed to be aggressive, and it's not supposed to be trying to dunk on anybody. And that's a very dunk on them kind of a line, really.
Yeah. Well, then that was kind of my basis of saying trying to dissect the difference between agnosticism and atheism there, or earlier on when you asked if I had 5 minutes. Well, that's really the problem is that pretending to know what you don't know. That's kind of the way I feel about it. When someone says, no, I'm a starch atheist, there is no God and I can prove it. I'm just kind of like, are you going to prove it, or are you just going to reason your way through it and try to sell me on your reasons?
Yeah. So, okay. So there's a lot there. I mean, we could spend hours talking about this stuff. Right. Let me just say that I think it's okay for the three of us and Peter to have our definition of what faith is. If you were to ask me what my definition of faith is, I can provide you with one. It wouldn't be pretending to know things that you don't know. I don't think that that's what faith is. But I think Peter did or still does think that that's the case. But when I'm engaging with somebody, whether it's Tim McGrew or somebody on the street who's 25 years old and they're a Christian, it's their definition that's important. I would have been willing to accept Tim's definition of faith for the purpose of that conversation. What's important is how is he applying the word? How does faith fit into his belief? Is it something that he gets after he believes Jesus is real? Is it something that he requires to conclude that Jesus is real? Is it necessary to conclude that the things that he reads in his holy book are true? Like, tell me what the word means to you, and I'll go with it. I'm not going to foist my definition on. I'll share my definition with you if you want, but it's not relevant. Because if we can show a person that the way that they're using their words to conclude that their beliefs are true, if we can use their terminology, their meanings, and start peeling back the layers, and they discover on their own that they're looking in a mirror and basically looking at their belief, and they can see, my goodness, this is just, what on earth am I thinking here? That's great. Why would you want to confuse things by asserting different definitions? So go with their definition, run with it, write it down, refer to it again and again. And I think it will end up working in your benefit.
I completely agree, and man, I've got a lot to add.
Yeah, we could really blow you up for hours.
Yeah, I was going to say this is going to reshape my.
Maybe we can do another talk or something.
I would love to have you back on. We could talk more about these things because I might get some feedback off of this one that would lead to more questions. I just have
maybe
a couple more to move through just as quickly as we can, because I think one of the things that you were centering on. And as to do with the relation of, like the definition of faith, and that the people are using faith as their epistemology, that they know something's true, or they justify it by having faith or by using or exercising faith or what have you. And that's not your definition. That's based on conversations that you had. And that's actually, I think, what Pete was trying to argue for in his debate was this is how people are using it that I'm talking to, kind of thing. And that's true in my own experience.
Okay, so it's been a while since I've looked at that or listened to that conversation, but I've listened to it 2 or 3 times, and it comes up frequently. And that might be something we can link to in the show notes. But where was I going with that? Oh, so yeah, sometimes people they define faith, and it's very clearly not a method. They're not using it as an epistemology. And what I think is funny is that there is a disconnect between the apologists, who I think realize that faith is a shitty epistemology. It's a shitty methodology. Hopefully I can say that word.
Yeah, that's fine. Actually, I was trying to check him before we started to not use foul language. Because I don't know if you were comfortable with it, but we're fine with it. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Let her rip.
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
Last hour
they're just words.
Yeah.
These are just words. I tell my kids are allowed to swear. I just say, use good judgment.
Yeah.
But when you listen to the conversations, if the person using street epistemology is careful, and I've learned to be careful, I'm not trying to trick a person into telling me that they're using faith as a method. I will let that word naturally come up. As I start asking them about what, why, and how, they mention faith. They are bringing this up, and they're clearly saying that they're using it as a way to conclude that this is true. Look at the freaking videos. You can see that this is what's happening. Yeah. We're not misrepresenting people. But what I think is interesting is the apologists realize that, oh my gosh, faith is, oh my God. No. Faith is the gift that you get after you believe that this is true. But no, the believers on the street, the people that I'm running into, the people in my community are telling me that they're using it. It's necessary for them to maintain or achieve a high degree of confidence that their belief is true. It's clear to me.
And that's the flaw in all of it, really.
Yeah,
that's your fly in your ointment, is the idea that you can't go back and reason through things because there is no reason, there is no rationality grounding your beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, in those cases, if that happens to be true, but I think, like you're saying, it's sort of a matter of them having to discover that for themselves. Yeah. And I guess it's still sticking sort of the objections and devil's advocate kind of mode here. That it's. There's a concern that it's like, well, you've caught someone maybe flat-footed a little bit, or you're asking question after question. How do you know? And they fall back on what sort of their their core intuitions essentially about faith, and using it that way, and and as you're saying, you've sort of already handled whether or not that's intended as a gotcha rather than something that's coming out on their own. And it's something that I've seen engaging with presuppositional apologists, and again, that's another funny term that most sane people have hopefully never heard of before. And
if you've never heard of it, you're probably better off.
You're blessed, I think, is what you are if you've never heard that term. And it's basically saying, unless you sort of affirm, faith in God as a guarantor of knowledge, you can't really know anything at all. And then you play this whole back and forth where they go after sort of like lay non-believers and say, well, how do you know, till you get down to these epistemic roots. And then you go, I'm not sure, I'm stuck. And then it's boom, gotcha. But honestly, I think you've already really shown a pretty strong distinction.
Yeah. So you mentioned before we started recording that we might talk about presuppositionalist and how is SE different. Yes, we are interested in how a person knows, or how do they conclude that this is true. So as we were kind of firing things up, I pulled up a transcript of a conversation I had with a woman named Kelsey, Kelsey. If you Google my name and her name, you'll probably get the video. But I just jotted down. So I looked through the transcripts, and I have like a list of the questions that I asked her. Mm-hmm. So if you just bear with me, I'm going to just read them.
Sure.
Are you okay if I record it? How do you spell it? That's her name. How long ago was the accident? How did you decide, Kelsey, to go to the Christian God after that incident and not Vishnu? Was it a car accident? How does that actually make the belief true? The best way to know that it's actually true? Are you saying that it's more... Are you saying that the more that you believe in something, the more it's likely to be true? But did you make the choice, Kelsey, because you were raised that way? Is everything that you've been taught growing up proven to be true? So how can you be certain that this top belief is actually true? Are you saying that it's more difficult to be around a person who holds a belief in a completely different God? So it's not just how do you know? How do you know? We want to pay very close attention to what the person is saying, because that's the genesis of the next question that we want to ask. Mm-hmm. So this isn't about being a petulant child and trying to frustrate somebody. It really isn't. I mean, if somebody like threw up their hands and they were upset with me, that would be a failure in my book. I want them to thank me for the conversation and want to learn more about street epistemology, because they see the benefit of those types of questions. And I think that's the big difference here.
Yeah, I think that's extremely well said, honestly, and in my experience with presuppositionalists. And I've encountered a few of the nicer ones and a whole lot of the other kind. And yeah, it's a lot of it is, the script essentially of, how do you know, could you be wrong about that, until you get down to sort of the bare bones, epistemic axioms and all this goofiness, and the idea is to slam dunk or to show that your worldview is false, or to close the mouth of the unbeliever, as I think it was Jason Lyle uses in some of his talks, and a lot of it's just destroying arguments against the belief in God and stuff like that, or arguments that stand against belief in God, so to speak. And yeah, it just shows, I think there's inherently different motivation, but I guess there is some of the fear there that it is sort of a scripted behavior of, trying to unpack that person, and sort of the fear of it becoming disingenuous on the part of, like, on your part. If you're starting with the belief that, like, well, I'm an atheist, you're a Christian, I'm starting from a position assuming that you're wrong and that you're false, and I'm just helping you unpack so you can figure out and you can be like me and you can be right. Like, is that...
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there is this sort of perception, especially if you watch a lot of videos of street epistemology on the same topics. So like if you only watch videos where people are using street epistemology where karma is the topic, you're probably going to notice some typical questions that we ask. But I think it's only because we're responding to what the person is telling us. So like if they say, well, I think karma is real because there's absolutely no way that it could be a coincidence. Like I've had coincidence happen, but it's certainly and then I've had karma happen. Like, and then we might ask, well, how can a person tell the difference? How are you telling the difference between a coincidence and karma? it's not like that's in a script. It's just sort of the natural progression of what you might want to ask, I guess. So I think it could look kind of scripted, but I even wrote a blog post about this on the Street Epistemology website if you want to check it out, where kind of getting a sense of where these conversations can go, I think could be useful, especially if you're sort of on the fence about having a talk like this. Like, it could be useful to watch 30 conversations about karma and then engage in somebody about karma, because you might be more prepared. But on the same token, you want to be sincere. You do want to try to be open to what they're telling you, that it maybe really is true. Maybe they really did base their belief on a very solid method that's testable. In that case, you should be open to believing what they have to say. So yeah, pretending to be surprised or those types of things, like being authentic when you're having these conversations, I think are really critical. Especially, you have to keep in mind that there are people who are critical of what we're doing and that are watching and that are looking for little things like that. Like, when he asked that question, he seemed kind of condescending when he did that, and not really like he was really interested in what was going on. So there's lots of people very closely watching what we're doing, and my advice really is to be authentic, be yourself, be open to believing what the person believes, be respectful, and while it's helpful to look at video examples, try not to just mimic them. Really try to be yourself and bring your own style to these types of things, because you may be approaching these conversations in a much better way than the people who are doing it now.
Gotcha. Final objection, maybe one that I've heard is that, well, you're practicing street epistemology, but you're not an epistemologist. Like, you've not, and that you don't have a PhD in epistemology, right? Or a lot of the people who have practicing street epistemology, that, well, they've never picked up a book on epistemology. Why are they calling them street epistemologists? Well, really, all they're trying to do is circumvent a person's natural defenses when they're having a belief sort of scrutinized. So you're more like street psychologists or something like that than epistemologists. So how would you respond to that as sort of the big final question of the night?
Yeah, like I mentioned at the start, I'm not really crazy about the name. I think it's sort of misleading. It perhaps gives people the impression that we have expertise in a particular area of academic epistemology. It's funny, this wasn't really a complaint until maybe the last year or so. So it's kind of funny how what is sort of what was never an objection before suddenly is. I'll be the first to admit that I know nothing about epistemology. I've never studied it formally. I know what you've seen me learn in these videos, but damn, I'm having freaking good conversations with people. If I can be better at what I'm doing by studying epistemology, make a case for it. I'll go back to school and study it if you think it's going to help me become more efficient at this thing. That being said, I think my time really probably would be better spent studying psychotherapy and psychology and motivational interviewing and cognitive behavioral therapy, because I think that's where these beliefs are coming from. So
it's almost like it sounds almost like you're accepting the objection. It's not really epistemology. What you're doing is that you're unpacking, what motivates beliefs.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like you're engaging in psychotherapy, exactly like you said.
Right.
My main focus in things was psychoanalysis, but they kind of go hand in hand a little bit. Psychoanalysis kind of drives a little deeper into the epistemological realm, but
yeah, I think if anyone really should be complaining, it might be people who are into psychotherapy and saying, you need to be really careful in what you're doing. And actually, some people do reach out, but they do it in a supportive way. Like, when you're done, make sure that you give them a way to contact you, because you're asking some really personal questions here.
Yeah.
And if you just end the talk and shake their hand and they never see you again, you kind of have an obligation to be there for people. So typically now, the people who are doing this, we try to be accessible. We try to give them a way to contact us and that type of thing. So we're learning from even the criticisms. I think we're learning from it. We're becoming better at street epistemology because of the complaints and not that there's many, but the few that there are, I think it's we're becoming better at this because of it. So I really do welcome criticism. We even created a Facebook group called Critique Street Epistemology, specifically so people can go there to raise objections to what they're hearing and seeing, so that we can really take it into consideration and try to modify what we're doing so that we can not cause harm, and we don't want to hurt people when we're doing this type of stuff.
Of course,
Gotcha.
I think that's a very fair consideration. I was going to say I've actually got a friend of mine who probably will be very interested in this podcast. I will push this on. Who is a psychotherapist and goes into this realm, and I'd like to see what his thoughts are on that. That could be fun. I'd like to put you in touch with him if he has anything to say. That'd be great.
I'm totally accessible on social media. Please, feel free to reach out on me on Twitter or Facebook or YouTube. I tend to get emails for every message that somebody leaves on a video, and I try to read them. And if it's interesting, I might respond. So
yeah, I guess that's a good point to ask you. What is the best way? How do we find you? Where do we find you on the web and YouTube and all that stuff? How do we track you down?
Yeah, Twitter. I'm active on Twitter. My handle is Magnabosco, which is just my last name. Mm-hmm. On Facebook and YouTube and Instagram, I'm not so much on Instagram, but it's Magnabosco210. But if you search for my name on any of those platforms, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, you'd probably be able to find me somewhere.
Sure. I just researched Street Epistemology. I found you all over the place, but
yeah, it's funny that actually when we first started looking into this, I actually thought you were the originator of Street Epistemology rather than Peter Boghossian, because you were sort of like the big face on it, and that's when you do the search of this, you come up more than Peter. I don't know if he'll like that or not. Yeah,
we're actually good friends. We're actually good friends, and I think he's. We talk frequently, so I think he's pretty content with the direction that it's going and sort of moving to the background. He's working on a second book. I think he's looking at what's happening with this method and possibly I think he's writing another book on it. So we might see. But yeah, he's definitely the originator. I just sort of took the idea and have started promoting it. And if somebody asks me to talk about it and do an interview like you guys did, I'll try to work it in. I love talking about it. I love practicing it, and I want to get better at it. So
I think that's
where we're at.
I think it's an excellent goal in general. I mean, I've always been a huge fan of the Socratic method in general, but I love to see that it's being applied in a way that's positive. And this idea of let's engage.
It's an intelligent application.
Yeah, it is.
Sure,
yeah. I mean, if you're going to engage in conversation with people, like, why not make it deep?
Yeah, and you can be disingenuous if you want, but yeah. The idea is maybe hopefully you're not. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I was gonna say I think if you go out being disingenuous and like I'm just here to just crush people and show them how foolish they are, I think it's going to become pretty evident that that's what you're up to. It's kind of easy to see through people's motivations. I think if you just listen to the types of questions they ask or notice, like I've shut conversations down with people because it seemed evident that if I asked 3 more questions, they would not believe what they believe anymore, and it would devastate them. So I've actually stopped. I've actually stopped interviews with people because it seemed like it would be harmful to them. Yeah, it's. Wow. I guess I kind of lost my track.
No, that's impressive, honestly, because and not only just the fact that you can see the arc of the conversation and how it's going to terminate. And to know to pull the plug before you get there, I think that it shows. Yeah, I would just say an amazing level of ability. And an intellectual 3 steps ahead in chess.
I'd say an intellectual maturity of sorts too. I mean, it's really good to realize, this has been a good exercise, and perhaps we've gotten somewhere where we're questioning things, but I don't want to just destroy this person either. You don't want to cause harm to them. Right. I
just remember what I was going to say, and that was sort of hearkening back to what I'd said before of, we want to get to the point where people will participate in this dialogue, explore their belief, love the technique, want to learn it, and then if they learn it and then they can do the same thing on you, that's great. Like I want people to use SE. I do it all the time on myself now, but I would love people to use SE on the claims that I make. In fact, I'm more careful these days on the assertions that I make because, hell, a lot of my friends on Facebook know this method, and they're going to probably call me on it and say, well, now, how are you concluding that that's true? How sure are you that that's true, Anthony? I get that all the time. So it humbles you. You learn to be a little bit more careful about the assertions that you tend to make.
Yeah, I think after we go offline here, I think I might have to challenge James and ask him, what is his level of confidence that atheism is true? And
I don't have a high level of confidence in that. I have a high level of agnosticism. I'm not going to particularly believe one thing or another.
Funny.
Oh, that actually reminds me. We have another Facebook group that's called Chat with a Street Epistemologist, where you can go to practice your skills. Or if you have a belief and you're like, I want one of those street epistemologist folks to challenge me on this belief, you can introduce yourself. There will be probably no shortage of people. We don't want to pile on, but there will probably be no shortage of people that will be willing to discuss that with you, either in a Facebook Messenger chat or right there on the page, or maybe a Skype or something like that, or a phone call or whatever. So this is growing, man. This is growing. It's catching on, and it's really been nice to be able to be on your show to talk about it.
It's really exciting.
Yeah, and thank you so much for coming on. I think it's been a really enjoyable conversation.
Definitely.
Cool.
For our part, you can find us on the web, fermentingopinions.com, Facebook, YouTube, Fermenting Opinions. We have a group, a page, and a channel, all that good stuff. Special shout out to our digital wizard, Ross Janes at janesmedia.com. He has his own podcast and stuff going. Please check him out. And for us, I'm David Popeiden.
I'm James McVeigh.
And we are Fermenting Opinions, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, David and James.